From Charlie Sheen secretly living with HIV for years, to Rock Hudson shocking Hollywood with his AIDS diagnosis in 1985, and Michael J. Fox battling Parkinson's at just 30, some of the industry's biggest stars have suffered in silence. But later on, we'll get into the terrifying rare nerve disorder that suddenly left an A-list action star completely paralyzed in the middle of filming. Actor Charlie Sheen told NBC's Today Show that he was diagnosed as HIV positive about 4 years ago, and that a few people who knew it demanded money from him to keep the secret. That one sentence delivered on live TV on November 17, 2015, cracked open one of the most expensive, most guarded, and most dangerous secrets in Hollywood history. "I'm here to admit that I am in fact HIV positive," Sheen told NBC's Matt Lauer. And just like that, the walls came down. What makes the Charlie Sheen story so staggering isn't just the diagnosis. It's everything that happened in the years before that confession. The silence, the blackmail, the millions paid out, and the women who say they never got the chance to make an informed choice. It all started around 4 years before the announcement, when Sheen found himself battling what he thought was a brain tumor. After enduring a battery of tests, including a hideous spinal tap, the results were devastating. Sheen was diagnosed with HIV. In his own words, the news hit him like a mule kick to the soul. Sheen said that he'd been diagnosed with the disease roughly 4 years ago, and that he learned he had HIV after battling headaches, insane migraines, and sweating the bed 2-3 nights in a row. He was hospitalized and had believed it was the end. Because once Charlie Sheen had that diagnosis in hand, he made a choice no one was going to know. Coming from a legendary Hollywood family, and once TV's highest paid actor, Charlie Sheen had been in the public eye for much of his life. The spotlight turned toward him even more glaringly in late 2015, when he disclosed that he'd been diagnosed with HIV 4 years earlier, and that he'd been blackmailed into paying out millions of dollars to keep the story quiet. For 4 years, Charlie Sheen was the most expensive secret in Hollywood. Every person he trusted with the diagnosis became a potential threat. He revealed the diagnosis to people he thought he trusted, but some of them demanded money to keep the information to themselves. He paid those people in the millions, he said. Later in the show, Lauer said that Sheen told him it was more than 10 million. One of those people, he said, was a prostitute who entered his bathroom, took a cell phone picture of his medication, and threatened to sell the image. That is the level of exposure he was living under. Every room a potential trap, every trusted face a possible extortion waiting to happen. At the time, Sheen said he was making the announcement to help fight the stigma of HIV and to end smear campaigns against him and shakedowns for money. Going public was, in a very real sense, an act of financial and psychological self-preservation. But the controversy surrounding his announcement did not end with the confession. It only deepened. Adding to the controversy was his admission that he continued to have relations with women, knowing that he was HIV positive at the time. He insisted it was impossible that he knowingly transmitted the virus to others. While he admitted to having unprotected sex with 2 people since the diagnosis, both were informed ahead of time and have been under the care of his doctor. Not everyone accepted that account. Several women alleged that he failed to disclose his status and put them at risk. In August 2022, Charlie settled a 2017 lawsuit filed by an ex-girlfriend who alleged he knowingly exposed her to HIV during sex. As part of the settlement, the actor agreed to pay the woman a total of $120,000. Delivered in monthly installments of $10,000, reported TMZ. At the time of his HIV disclosure, attention turned toward his ex-wife, Denise Richards. The actress told Access Hollywood that neither she nor her 2 daughters that she shares with Charlie had been affected. A spokesman for Mueller told People magazine that she and her sons with Sheen, 6-year-old twins, did not have HIV. His physician, Dr. Robert Huizenga, an associate professor of clinical medicine at UCLA, confirmed that Charlie does not have AIDS. While an HIV-positive diagnosis used to be considered a death sentence, and there still is no cure, medical advancements have helped turn it into a manageable illness. However, antiviral drugs must be taken for a lifetime. And Sheen's story, despite the lawsuits and the scandal, had an unexpected side effect on the broader public. HIV test sales jumped up to 95% immediately after the 2015 announcement, and remained as high as 60% up to a month later. One man's humiliation became a public health moment that doctors and researchers hadn't been able to manufacture in years of campaigns and awareness drives. Charlie provided a health update saying he switched medicines and found success. His previous HIV medication had left him with what he described as borderline dementia. The Charlie Sheen story is many things. a cautionary tale about secrets, a window into the extortion economy that surrounds celebrity illness, and an accidental public health campaign. But it is not the only story, because while Sheen's announcement came in 2015, the story of Hollywood and AIDS had already been written in blood decades before. On July 25, 1985, Rock Hudson, a quintessential tall, dark, and handsome Hollywood leading man of the 1950s and 1960s, who made more than 60 films during his career, announced through a press release that he was suffering from acquired immune deficiency syndrome. With that announcement, Hudson became the first major celebrity to go public with such a diagnosis. The shockwave that followed that announcement did not just ripple through Hollywood, it shook the White House, redirected the flow of federal funding, and rewrote the way an entire generation understood who AIDS could touch. But to understand the full weight of what happened when Rock Hudson put his name to a disease that America had refused to acknowledge, you have to go back to who Rock Hudson was, and the extraordinary lengths he had gone to in order to keep two truths buried at the same time. A well-liked actor of modest talent, Hudson was one of the first known Hollywood celebrities to die of AIDS-related complications. The extensive publicity surrounding his death drew attention to the disease. Hudson achieved stardom with his role in Magnificent Obsession in 1954, followed by All That Heaven Allows in 1955 and Giant in 1956, for which he received a nomination for the Academy Award for Best Actor. Hudson also found continued success with a string of romantic comedies co-starring Doris Day. In the public imagination, Rock Hudson was masculinity itself. The square jaw, the broad shoulders, the easy laugh. To protect his macho image, Hudson's off-screen life as a gay man was kept secret from the public. His publicity team had spent decades constructing a persona so airtight that even in death, they initially tried to deflect. Before he came out, his publicity team said that he had liver cancer. The truth was something they had already known for over a year. Unknown to the public, Hudson was diagnosed with AIDS on June 5, 1984. Over the next several months, Hudson kept his illness a secret and continued to work, while at the same time traveling to France and other countries seeking a cure or treatment to slow the progression of the disease. In May 1984, he attended a state dinner at the White House. Having known Ronald and Nancy Reagan since their years in Hollywood, guests reportedly noticed that Hudson seemed in ill health, but he claimed he was recovering from a bug he'd caught on set. Just weeks later, Hudson learned he was HIV positive. At the time, the public knew little about the disease. Some believed only homosexuals could contract it, and early news accounts referred to it as the gay plague, or GRID. Those suffering with the disease faced moral scorn, ridicule, and even the abandonment of loved ones, with many Americans terrified of the potential spread of the disease. That was the world Rock Hudson was navigating, a world where the disease he had been silently carrying was not just a medical crisis, but a social death sentence, and so he carried it alone. During a visit to London in 1984, he gave a rare solo television interview. Appearing gaunt on BBC's Wogan talk show, he reviewed his career, declaring that fate had played a huge part in his success. On July 16, 1985, Hudson joined Doris Day for a Hollywood press conference, announcing the launch of her new cable TV show. His emaciated appearance was such a shock that clips of the reunion were broadcast repeatedly over national news shows that night, and for days to come. The world could no longer not see it, and that became the moment that changed everything. Diagnosed in 1984, the actor publicly denied his status until 1985, when his declining health made it impossible to hide, and he died of AIDS complications that same year. Coming out with his diagnosis not only made Rock Hudson the face of AIDS, it also triggered a change of public opinion on HIV/AIDS, as well as an almost instant increase in government funding for treatment and support programs. The reaction from those inside Hollywood was immediate and profound. Joan Rivers was quoted as saying, "2 years ago when I hosted a benefit for AIDS, I couldn't get one major star to turn out." Rock's admission is a horrendous way to bring AIDS to the attention of the American public, but by doing so, Rock in his life has helped millions in the process. What Rock has done takes true courage. Morgan Fairchild said that Rock Hudson's death gave AIDS a face, but the political ramifications cut even deeper. Rock Hudson was a friend of Reagan's, and his death was said to have changed the president's view of the disease. However, Reagan was criticized for not addressing the issue of AIDS in a major public speech until 1987. By that time, more than 20,000 Americans had already died of the disease, and it had spread to over 100 countries. Shortly after his death, People reported that since Hudson made his announcement, more than $1.8 million in private contributions, more than double the amount collected in 1984, had been raised to support AIDS research. A few days after Hudson died, Congress set aside $221 million to develop a cure for AIDS, and his former partner was watching all of this from a position of horror and fury. Following Hudson's death, Mark Christian, Hudson's former lover, sued his estate on grounds of intentional infliction of emotional distress. Christian claimed that Hudson continued having sex with him until February 1985, more than 8 months after Hudson knew that he had HIV. Although he repeatedly tested negative for HIV, Christian claimed that he suffered from severe emotional distress. After learning from a newscast that Hudson had been diagnosed with AIDS, the parallels to the Charlie Sheen story, playing out 3 decades later, are impossible to ignore. The secrecy, the non-disclosure, the partners left uninformed, the lawsuits that followed. The pattern was not new. It was a pattern that Hollywood had practiced for decades. Hudson died on October 2, 1985, at his LA home, aged 59. Among his bequests was $250,000 for medical research, funds that were used to launch the American Foundation for AIDS Research, AMFAR. Rock Hudson died with the truth finally out. For another Hollywood icon, the truth never fully surfaced until after his funeral. Rock Hudson cracked the door open in 1985, but behind him was a line of names, celebrated faces that audiences had loved, without ever knowing what was quietly consuming them from the inside. Liberace succumbed to AIDS-related pneumonia at age 67. He was never out about his sexuality or HIV status. The man who had packed Las Vegas showrooms for decades, who had made sequins and candelabras his stage identity, who had sued a journalist for implying he was gay. He died of a disease he refused to name, in a year when that silence still felt like the only option available. Liberace's death in February 1987, just over a year after Rock Hudson's, followed the same pattern. A public figure, a hidden sexuality, a disease that carried a social stigma so severe that disclosure felt more dangerous than the illness itself. His doctors initially listed his cause of death as cardiac arrest due to subacute encephalopathy, a brain disease. It was only after an autopsy, ordered by the Riverside County coroner over the objections of his estate, that the truth came out. The cause of death was officially recorded as cytomegalovirus pneumonia, an AIDS-defining illness. The layers of concealment that surrounded Liberace's death, the estate's resistance to the autopsy, the initial misleading reporting, the years of legal battles over who knew what and when, paint a picture of just how systematically Hollywood protected certain secrets, and how completely those protections could fail once a body told its own story. Then there was Robert Reed. Robert Reed was a Shakespearean-trained actor who became America's dad in 1969, when he was cast as Mike Brady in The Brady Bunch. Reed, who was gay, hid his sexuality during his decades in Hollywood. His death, originally attributed to colon cancer, was later found to have been hastened by AIDS. Robert Reed, who played everyone's favorite dad on The Brady Bunch, died of cancer, but it was later revealed that his HIV-positive status contributed significantly to his death. Robert Reed. Mike Brady. The father of America's most famous television family. The man whose presence in living rooms across the country represented safety, stability, wisdom. His actual diagnosis, HIV-positive, dying of AIDS-related complications in 1992, was a secret so closely guarded that his own Brady Bunch co-stars were largely kept in the dark during his final months. The story of Robert Reed is in many ways the story of an era. The pressures on gay men in Hollywood in the 1970s and 1980s were so immense that an actor whose public image depended entirely on the projection of family values could not afford even a whisper of his true private life. The actor was beloved by millions, but he had to live a double life, concealing his sexuality to secure his career. For Reed, that double life extended all the way to his death certificate. And then there was Anthony Perkins. Another name, another buried truth. Psycho star Anthony Perkins lost his battle with AIDS at age 60. He was diagnosed with HIV in the late 1980s. While he kept it a secret, he worked with Project Angel Food, which provides meals for homebound people with HIV. In a statement released shortly before his death in September 1992, he said, "There are many who believe that this disease is God's vengeance, but I believe it was sent to teach people how to love and understand and have compassion for each other. Norman Bates, the most famous screen psychopath in American cinema history, dying of AIDS, quietly, feeding the sick and dying through a charity program, while keeping his own mortality a private matter until the very end. The contrast between the character the world knew and the human reality behind it is almost too sharp to process. These names, Liberace, Robert Reed, Anthony Perkins, represent the generation of Hollywood that carried their diagnoses in complete silence. Rock Hudson broke the seal, but hundreds of others never did. There is a photograph from the set of Doc Hollywood in 1991. Michael J. Fox, then at the absolute height of his career, is somewhere in the frame, and his left hand is doing something that none of the crew around him would have yet understood. While filming Doc Hollywood in 1991, Michael developed a tremor in his pinky finger. A consultation with a neurologist revealed a surprising and devastating diagnosis. He had early onset Parkinson's disease. He was only 29 years old. He was 29 years old, and he had just been handed a neurological disease that had no cure. That would progress without stopping, and that doctors told him would leave him unable to work within a decade. Fox did not make his condition known to the public until 1998, which means that for 7 years of appearances, interviews, award shows, film premieres, and charity events, Michael J. Fox was quietly managing a degenerative brain disease while the world watched and saw nothing. But what the world didn't see is where the real story lives. After being privately diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 1991, and being cautioned he had 10 good working years left, Fox hastily signed a 3-film contract, appearing in For Love or Money, Life with Mikey, and Greedy. The urgency behind those decisions, the contracts, the output, the relentless schedule, was driven by a clock that only he could hear ticking. He took on projects because of time restrictions and financial pressures, because they were inflated in my head, so he chose as many quick, successful movies as he could. Eventually, he came to terms with choosing his projects more strategically. It should have been to do as many good ones as I could. And then there was the drinking. Fox has been open in subsequent years about the fact that he self-medicated with alcohol during those early years of denial, that the diagnosis and the terror it carried sent him into a spiral that he managed to keep largely invisible to the outside world. His first book, Lucky Man, focused on how, after 7 years of denial of the disease, he set up the Michael J. Fox Foundation, stopped drinking, and became an advocate for people living with Parkinson's disease. 7 years of denial. For a man who eventually became one of the most public faces of a disease in modern history, the decade between his diagnosis and his disclosure is a window into something deeply private. The way in which a person can receive news that fundamentally restructures who they are and simply refuse to let anyone else see it. In 1998, Fox disclosed his 1991 diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. He became an advocate for finding a cure and founded the Michael J. Fox Foundation in 2000 to help fund research. The public reaction to his disclosure was overwhelmingly supportive, which in retrospect makes the 7 years of silence feel even more poignant. His Michael J. Fox Foundation has raised more than $1 billion to fund research to find a cure for Parkinson's, a degenerative disease that has affected Muhammad Ali, Neil Diamond, Jesse Jackson, Ozzy Osbourne, Linda Ronstadt, and Fox himself. $1 billion raised because one man decided eventually to stop hiding. But the disease did not stop because he went public. It kept progressing, it kept taking. Fox continues to inspire millions through his acting career, even while battling Parkinson's disease. I wake up and get the message of what the day is gonna be like, and I try to adjust to it. The 64-year-old told People, "I keep getting new challenges physically, and I get through it." He now uses a wheelchair to get around, and says, "You take the good, and you seize it." For his advocacy of a cure for Parkinson's disease, he received the Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in 2022, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2025. The Presidential Medal of Freedom awarded to a man who was told at 29 that he had 10 good working years left, and who spent the next 3+ decades proving that timeline wrong, not by defeating the disease, but by refusing to let it dictate the terms of his life. Fox returned to television with a guest role in the 3rd season of the Apple TV dramedy Shrinking, which stars Harrison Ford, who plays a therapist with Parkinson's. The show was loosely inspired by Fox, who plays a character with the same brain disease. There is something deeply satisfying about that particular detail. The man who spent 7 years hiding a Parkinson's diagnosis now playing a character with Parkinson's in a show about a man who helps others process grief and dysfunction. The arc is almost too neat to believe, but that's the Michael J. Fox story. The actors in the first 4 parts of this video made the news when their diagnoses came out. Some because they chose to speak, some because the disease spoke for them. But there is a deeper layer of this story. Names that were genuinely shocking, diagnoses that were handled with such discretion or deflection that they barely registered in the public consciousness, or that only became known years after the fact. In a May 2021 interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Billy Porter revealed that in 2007 he was diagnosed HIV positive. He'd kept it a secret for 14 years, but shared that playing Pray Tell, his HIV-positive character on Pose, helped him come to terms with his struggle. 14 years. Billy Porter spent 14 years in Hollywood, doing press, doing awards, seasons, performing, winning, with an HIV diagnosis that he had told no one. The Emmy-winning star of the TV show Pose was diagnosed with HIV in 2007, but kept his status quiet out of fear over how the entertainment industry would react. He used his HIV-positive character as a proxy until the COVID-19 pandemic led him to take stock of his life and share his status with the world. The proxy detail is one of the most striking things in this entire story. Billy Porter was in effect saying the things that he needed to say, processing his diagnosis, exploring its emotional terrain, speaking its truth through a fictional character, because doing so through his own voice felt too dangerous. The screen became his confessional. Then there is the story of Danny Pintauro, former Who's the Boss. Child star Danny Pintauro revealed, during an appearance on Oprah, Where Are They Now?, that he had been HIV positive for 12 years. Pintauro, who had played Jonathan Bauer on one of the most watched sitcoms of the 1980s, delivered that revelation quietly to a daytime TV audience years after the diagnosis had already reshaped his private life completely. And then there is the story of Alan Alda, MASH, Benjamin Franklin Hawkeye Pierce, one of the most beloved television actors in American history. Actor, director, screenwriter, and author Alan Alda, best known for playing Hawkeye Pierce in the TV series MASH, was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2015. But Alda's disclosure, when it finally came, was handled with a characteristically direct pragmatism that set it apart from almost every other story in this video. He didn't wait for the tabloids. He didn't get blackmailed, explaining that he had noticed a thumb tremor 3 years before coming forward, and that he wanted to speak openly before someone else did it for him. What's notable about Alda's approach is what it reveals by contrast. In an industry where the Charlie Sheen story played out as extortion and scandal, and where Rock Hudson's death became a cultural earthquake, Alan Alda's quiet public disclosure felt almost radical in its normalcy. He said he had Parkinson's. He said he was managing it. He carried on. There is also the matter of Freddie Mercury, not a Hollywood actor in the traditional sense, but a performer whose relationship with secrecy about his diagnosis stands as one of the most studied examples. In the entire history of celebrity illness, Mercury denied AIDS rumors throughout the 80s, even after being diagnosed in 1987. When Queen failed to tour after releasing The Miracle in 1989, speculation only picked up, while Mercury's increasingly frail appearance did little to dissuade the rumor mill. Privately, Mr. Bulsara buckled down to record as much music as he could before the end came, when he'd given up on his AIDS medication in favor of painkillers. Publicly, Mercury only confirmed his AIDS diagnosis a day before his death. One day, after years of rumors, public weight loss visible on every stage and television screen, and the quiet suspension of the touring career that had made him a global icon, Freddie Mercury gave the world one day's notice. In 1991, Queen's frontman Freddie Mercury was the first major rock star to die from complications from AIDS, only days before he had released an international statement about his illness. The statement itself, released on November 23, 1991, was a masterpiece of controlled disclosure, following the enormous conjecture in the press over the last 2 weeks. I wish to confirm that I have tested HIV positive and have AIDS. Freddie Mercury died the following evening. These stories, taken together, reveal something specific about the way Hollywood has historically processed serious illness, particularly illnesses that carry social stigma. The default is concealment, the pattern is denial. The disclosure, when it comes, is almost always forced by circumstance, by declining health that can no longer be hidden, by tabloid pressure that makes denial too expensive, by blackmailers who have made the silence literally unaffordable, or in rare cases like Alan Alda or Michael J. Fox, by the person themselves on their own timeline, on their own terms. What almost never happens is the simplest thing: an actor finding out they are seriously ill and telling the world. The gap between those two realities, what happens and what could happen, is a measurement of the distance between Hollywood as institution and Hollywood as human beings. The institution protects the brand. The human beings pay the price of that protection, sometimes for decades, sometimes until the day they die.